let's get started. So Wilson, you're up. And I'm gonna put this here. So Wilson is on our work group. We've known each other for quite a while. He talked actually at our 2019 or 2017 conference. Yeah, because they were using cameras, downhole cameras, and it's really cool. So he's going to talk about Hurricane Helene, which I think is a really valuable thing to talk about right now, given the way the weather's been. And so he's with the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services in Raleigh, and it's all yours.
Good morning. How are we doing today? So as he mentioned, I work for the Division of Public Health in North Carolina. Been there with the state 22 years, worked at DEQ originally, helped start our private drinking water well program in July of 2008. So in North Carolina, we permit every drinking water well that goes in. We sample every well. We witness the grout inspection. So we have a fairly robust program. But this year he asked me to speak on Hurricane Helene because I will admit in 22 years at the state, this was probably the most trying time of my career and our department's. It was just, and still is, extremely stressful situation we've been dealing with. But as you probably know, September 23rd, potential tropical cyclone was forming, number 9, down in the Gulf. And by September 27th, we had 4 days of heavy rains in western North Carolina, and they weren't prepared for this. I don't think they had any clue it was going to be to the extent it was, so a lot of people didn't evacuate. A lot of people were trapped after the storm. But it struck in September of 2024, obviously causing widespread devastation, resulted in 104 fatalities across the state. 34 of those were caused by drowning and 23 from landslides. And we're still dealing with landslide issues, especially from the septic and well permitting aspect. And as of December of 2024, we estimate damage over $60 billion in climbing. Has anybody seen the movie Dirty Dancing? I would assume you have the picture at the bottom left is where that was filmed, Lake Lure in western North Carolina. That's what it looked like after the storm. So it was pretty much wiped out. And you can see from the other photo, many rooftops were barely above the flood levels in this area. And the best term I can use for this storm is it was different. You know, I'm used to hurricanes down east. The water comes, the water goes. Here it was just millions and millions of gallons of water rushing through valleys, rushing down mountains, and it's not something we have ever encountered in my lifetime in North Carolina. There was obviously extensive damage to roads, bridges, and many communities were isolated. And you'll see in future slides that really complicated our search and recovery efforts, our getting people back in their homes. You couldn't get to people. I mean, I had staff going out to help, and you had to go down into South Carolina, Georgia, just to get to some of the westernmost counties because there weren't roads available. Highway 40 was closed, which was our main thoroughfare to western North Carolina. There was widespread flooding, which compromised countless septic systems, private drinking water wells, and we were actually shocked at just how many springs are still utilized in western North Carolina. We knew they were out there, but I mean, it was an eye-opener, and you'll see in my later slides, people are very protective of their springs. They do not want to leave their springs, but obviously they're significantly more difficult to disinfect, to bring back into use. So that was a major eye-opener for us. And there were enormous power outages, lack of sewer and water, and that was what was the most stressful part of my job is we regulate septic systems and private drinking water wells, but we had so many municipalities that had no municipal water, no municipal sewer. They were coming to us for answers, and we didn't have great answers. They didn't really have a backup plan when your entire wastewater treatment plant is washed away. So in the aftermath, obviously I've already mentioned the flooding, downed trees, roads destroyed, no power, and there were a lot of people without heat, power, and this was in September. So as they sat there and power was restored months later, it started getting cold in the mountains. So it was a very significant public health concern for us. Landslides, as I mentioned, continue to be a major concern. Not sure how well you can see it, but if you see the white pipe sticking out the side of that cliff, that's running from the septic tank. So the soil, the material that's gone, that was their drain field. So us just getting people back in their homes in some cases is not possible. They don't have the property, they don't have the soils, they don't have anything left to reestablish their home. And if you can see the picture on the far left, what's that? Is that the top button? Okay, if you see the pitch, can you see the pointer?
Yeah, point at the screen, it should work.
I'm trying. Oh, there it is. So that well was actually still in use when we got out there. There was no creek through that area originally. That was just a normal piece of land. They still had the plumbing running to the home. They were still utilizing that well, but obviously that's something that we're going to have to replace. You can see the middle photo, casing, many situations where the casing was just broken off at land surface. I went out and helped do some disinfection of wells and water sampling, and you would go down a river, and on one side of the river there's campers, mobile homes, and they were in the top of trees. So many of these areas were just completely washed away. And then I just found the photo on the right interesting because it shows grout. It was about 12 feet of grout, and that was at land surface. So where you see that 12 inches of the 6-inch well casing sticking above land surface, that was flush with ground surface at one point in time. And this is what we found in most situations. The wells weren't properly sealed. You can see the bottom left photo, there's no well vent there. So any flood waters that made its way on top of that well, and many of these were submerged for days and underneath 10, 15 feet of water. So there was a lot of flood water that made its way in these wells. So our response, initially it was for drinking water wells to assist the public with assessing and restoring drinking water wells quickly, because everybody, once the flood waters receded, they wanted to get back in their homes. Businesses wanted to reopen. So our goal was to try to get wells sampled, get wells disinfected as quickly as possible. But again, we still had those barriers that prevented us from being able to get to many of these residents. Septic systems was also a major issue, and I'll get into kind of how our rules had to be changed or laws had to be passed to kind of accommodate these homeowners, because we have rules in place. First time in 30 some years, we've revised our on-site wastewater rules as of 2024, and we have requirements for reconnections. We have to go out and inspect that system, make sure that system is sized for whatever home you're installing on your property. So there's a lot more hoops to jump through, but when the legislators saw that there's these hurdles in place, they passed laws to try to help these homeowners. And then facilities, that was another extremely stressful part of our job. Like I said, restaurants wanted to get back open, daycares needed to get open. A lot of those were either served by well and septic, or they were served by municipal water and sewer and needed us to provide some sort of alternative option until that water or sewer could be provided. And then we dealt with a lot of shelters. I can't explain the outpouring that came from the public, from everybody. I mean, there's still just thousands of bottles of water sitting in Western North Carolina, more than they could ever use. So the outpouring was incredible. So for wells, we needed to assess, is the well even repairable? Is it able to be utilized? And then we had to figure out, are they shared wells? So a lot of these properties in many cases are also rental homes, they're Airbnbs. So we didn't have that homeowner sitting there explaining to us, is it connected to my neighbor's well? Do we need to let them know we're going to cut the well off for a day, disinfect the well, collect water samples? So there were a lot of questions that had to be asked, and we don't have good records. You'll see at the end of my talk, the biggest hurdle we're trying to overcome is lack of data. You know, we started permitting wells in July 1 of 2008, so every local health department has those records. We don't have much at the state, and everybody reaches out to us. Legislators are wanting to know numbers. So that was extremely frustrating. And then public education, you know, safety. We don't want you just starting to use that well as soon as power is restored if you haven't purged that well, you haven't disinfected that well, you haven't sampled it to make sure it's safe. And when I say safe, that's a loose term because we're only sampling for bacteria. You know, in a flood like this, there's all sorts of other contaminants that likely made their way into the well. And I know there's groups from UNC right now looking at additional sampling. So there's other efforts to determine if pesticides, herbicides, volatile organic compounds, if there's other contaminants that made their way in. But with what it costs to run all those analysis and how tricky they can be to collect, that's not something that we could allow the homeowner to do. That's not something that the state really could afford to do. So we're really limited after a storm to collecting bacteriological samples. And then springs, as I mentioned, users are extremely loyal. They do not want to do away with their springs. Many are dependent upon recharge, and they are obviously prone to contamination. Many of these are just a spring box in a creek, essentially. Disinfection, so we provided information to these spring users, and it was difficult to get funding. FEMA was not paying homeowners for spring repairs or spring damage. Now, they would provide funding if you wanted to replace that spring with a well, but as you'll see from the numbers, the funding that was provided is not sufficient for replacing or repairing septic or well systems. So we had to work together to serve our public. I mean, it was every agency, hands on deck. And obviously in our state, the local health departments, all 100, issue all well and septic permits. So we're meeting with all the health directors multiple times a day. We're meeting with their staff. But there was a public health need. It was an overwhelming natural disaster. Nobody really knew what to do. We've had meetings since then. What could we do better next time? But this isn't really something you can prepare for. I think there's things we learned from this storm, but I mean, this was, you know, a once in a lifetime type storm. So I think we have learned things, but it's very difficult to prepare for something like this. But our top priority and my group's top priority was water quality. So as I mentioned, we provide free bacteriological samples after pretty much every hurricane we've encountered. When you have them down east, everybody's used to them. We don't see many water samples collected. We saw a much greater outpouring in the mountains, but if you've ever been to the mountains of North Carolina, a lot of those people don't want you on their property. You know, I don't know what's out there. And when you walk in your state government, I mean, many of my counties have been, you walk out and there's a shotgun standing right there. I mean, they just don't want you on their property. So I'll mention the kind of direct-to-consumer site approach we took on this one to try to get more sampling. But we had the State Public Health Lab running analysis, and then we were lucky in that the EPA provided 2 mobile labs. We had one in Boone, North Carolina, Watauga County, right in the back parking lot of the health department, and we had one in Buncombe County, Asheville, North Carolina. So they were able to help run analysis on top of what our state lab was providing. And these are just pictures from the health department. That's one of the mobile labs. So it was crucial to have that assistance because I don't know that our state lab had the bandwidth to run all these samples. So what we did do, I mentioned the direct-to-consumer sites, and I'll give credit to Northeastern and other universities I've worked with. That's not something we've done in the past. In the past, if you wanted a water sample after a hurricane, the county went out and took those samples. But we knew because of the widespread flooding and also, as I mentioned, the lack of state government allowed on some of these properties, we wanted to provide a way that homeowners could come in, collect disinfection kits, collect the water sample bottles, and bring those back to us to have them analyzed. And this actually worked very well. There were some hurdles we had to overcome initially, but we wanted to provide immediate assistance. Now we're state government, so by immediate assistance, this took weeks in some cases, and I'll kind of get into some of those details. But we did help create the direct-to-consumer sites. We had, I believe it was 11 sites, if I'm not mistaken, at counties that were willing to provide this service. The other counties would actually go out and disinfect wells and collect samples because they had the manpower or they had less numbers of flooded wells in their counties. But our goal was to safely get drinking water wells back in use. This is some of our state vans. I had staff meet me at the state lab on a Saturday. We loaded up buckets. So what we did is we ordered way too many buckets. If you need a 5-gallon bucket, we probably have 2,000 sitting behind the state lab right now. But we got buckets. We got hoses, and that was another thing. We're working through emergency preparedness, emergency response groups, and I'm saying, you know, the easiest thing for me is to get a 6-foot-long hose for a washer machine because we can cut that in half. We have 2 disinfection kits in. State goes out and orders the most expensive stainless steel wrapped hoses. Had to send those back because they're not easy to cut. They're dangerous ones. So it was stuff like that, and then even the chlorine. We were ordering thousands of pounds of calcium hypochlorite. It took almost a month for us to get that in because we didn't have a vendor in our state system that provides that. And I actually got scolded because I'm pretty close to almost all the drillers in our state, and I had one reach out to a supplier in Texas. They sent us 700 pounds of calcium hypochlorite in 1-pound bags. And I was asked, are they an approved vendor? Did you get permission for this? I've yet to respond to that email because they stepped up. They provided us with materials up front. So that's something we learned from this. You need to have this stuff readily available before a storm. But many of these items, we just don't have room to store. I mean, even health departments. And honestly, the chlorine was, in some cases, a mess because we tell the state we need them in 1-pound bags. They ordered 9-pound jugs. They told me, well, you can go there and put each one in a 1-pound bag, and then trying to drive with that material in a van. There were times we had our head out the window just trying to get these to the local health departments. But I will give a shout out to Kyla and her group. They actually came down to North Carolina. They've done a lot of research with us in North Carolina. They wanted to do something. And there's a lot of groups that want to do something, but they're Many of them are in the way. They actually met one of my drillers who's on North Carolina groundwater. He provided materials for them to create mock well heads. So what they could do is they created just a 6-inch drill well with a sample tap, basically what a completed wellhead should look like per our regulations, and they could have those at the direct-to-consumer site. So they could show a homeowner when they come in, this is where you put the hose. This is where you remove the vent, put the hose back in to circulate the disinfection materials. This is how to do everything. And it was just kind of a visual that was nice. And the counties appreciated this. They've held on to them so they can show people when they come in for a well application how to do this. And I'm not going to go through all this, but this was another hurdle we had to overcome because in North Carolina, all the private drinking water well samples come to the state lab unless you have an in-house lab. What we learned that I never knew this whole time is our courier service collects 2 rounds of samples at every health department in the state. There's the health department samples for any, sicknesses, illnesses, and then there's the water samples. The ones from the health department go straight to Raleigh the day of. The water samples go to their courier service in Charlotte, sit overnight, and then come to Raleigh. So we were concerned that if homeowners brought in samples at a bad time, we weren't going to meet that threshold to run the bacteria samples. So we had to create a network of making sure that the samples either got to Raleigh. We had forms that if the homeowner brought in the sample after 2 o'clock, it needed to be analyzed at the EPA lab, or we actually had about 7 or 8 local health departments that had labs that volunteered their services to run these analyses as well. So it was pretty tricky trying to figure this out at first, but I think we found a good system. As I mentioned, we encountered more springs than expected. FEMA's not providing funding for those, so that's been a major hurdle to attempt to overcome. We also worked with Kelsey and Kyla's group to create online tutorials, even though there wasn't a lot of power, and that's something we've learned from this, just having a way that a homeowner can watch somebody go step by step on how to disinfect their well, step by step on how to collect a water sample, how to bag everything up, how to get it to the health department. The gentleman in the picture is Andy Bleth, and he was actually the supervisor in Watauga when this storm hit. He now works for me. He was in the midst of retiring and coming to the state. So he was crucial because he knows wells. He was boots on the ground. They actually were one of the districts that would go out and disinfect wells and collect samples for people instead of them having to do it themselves. So by the numbers in total, and this number has increased a little bit. This is probably a couple weeks old, but we got just shy of 3,000 water samples collected, which I felt was pretty good. The number of wells that were affected is probably lower than what we originally expected. As far as total coliform, we saw about 37% were positive for total coliform, which for all new private drinking water wells in North Carolina, whether it's because they didn't properly disinfect or there was an issue with the sample collection, we see about 33 to 34%. So that was pretty consistent. We did see just over 8% present for E. coli, which is much higher than what we tend to see in our average water samples. So it did indicate that there was some contamination concerns. And we also learned 2 things with these numbers. One, they're a little skewed because Buncombe County, Asheville, one of the hardest hit areas, they sent out, a blast of we're collecting free samples. So any and everybody on a well came in for water samples, even if they weren't inundated with floodwaters. And we weren't going to turn them down. Anytime we can give somebody a free water sample is great. So some of the negative results are probably skewed. We also had homeowners say, I'm not disinfecting my well. I'm just going to collect the sample. I want a free bucket. I don't want anything else. So, we know that a lot of these probably either weren't properly disinfected or disinfected at all. Kind of got into this became very political. I actually had a county, there was a hotel where CNN was staying, some other government agencies, and their system was completely gone. So every toilet that was flushed in that hotel went straight into the river behind it. Our guidance is you shut them down. But a senator said, you're not shutting them down. He actually sent the staff home from the county on paid leave and said, you need to quit doing your job. So this became very political very quickly. So they did several things. They extended septic permits for 10 years. If your permit was set to expire in 2024, we have a 5-year expiration date. That extended it 5 more years. If we issued a permit in 2024, it's good for till 2034. So we gave you more time to try to address any septic issues you had. They finally addressed temporary water supplies. I can't tell you how frustrated I was with the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality. We always get into it because we regulate private drinking water wells. Anything less than 15 connections or 25 people, They regulate everything over that. I had schools coming in. I had schools paying over $100,000 for a well just so they could use it for a month or two until municipal water was restored. So not only was there price gouging because they could get that much cheaper any other time, but there was no oversight. They wanted us to permit it, and I'm telling them we can't. Problem is DEQ comes back and says, well, if they don't use it more than 60 days, it's not a public water supply. So we're not going to touch it. And it got heated, I'll tell you that now. So, and I had concerns. I mean, we're going from municipal water that has corrosion inhibitors to groundwater. I had, Flint, Michigan type concerns. So finally, we convinced the General Assembly to pass a law that said if it's used for that 60-day time frame, it has to have an operator, has to be sampled weekly, has to have treatment, because we wanted to protect these schools. We wanted to protect nursing homes, daycares. I mean, it was a lot of them that it was months before they got their municipal water back on board. And then we allowed temporary connections. So when I talked about earlier, we have rules for existing system approvals. If they wanted to put a modular out there until they could rebuild their house, we're supposed to go out and inspect it. We're supposed to say, no, that modular is a 3-bedroom. Your system is sized for 2. We can't approve this. And that became very political. So they passed a law that said a homeowner can sign an affidavit that states there's nothing wrong with my system. I'm not going to increase the daily design flow, and I'm going to use this for minimum 12 months or until my home is reestablished. So that took us out of the picture. That took us from having to say, you can't do it. Kind of the responsibility is on the property owner at that point. And these are all the counties that were part of that bill. Oddly enough, there's a few down east that asked for some sort of funding after this. I don't think they thought that was going to extend their septic permits for 10 years, stuff like that. But really west of Alexander County, Wilkes County, that was really the hardest hit areas. Kind of mentioned the funding side of things. As of April, $1.38 million for 707 septic repairs and 165 septic replacements in 31 counties, $1.7 million for 879 well repairs and 120 well replacements. But as you see, the average funding is not even close to being enough to repair or replace septic or wells. So it's a starter, and this money is on top of what their insurance company may have provided. So if the insurance company didn't provide enough to rebuild or repair their home, a lot of this funding may go towards that. So we're going to see septic and well issues for years to come. So post-Helene communications, our department assisted in development of 14 guidance documents. A lot of those were revolving around restaurants and daycares, just trying to get those reestablished. And when I say we held countless meetings, I was in meetings 10, 12 hours a day, every weekend. I mean, it was a trying time for all of us, participating in hundreds of local health department meetings, as well as a lot of public health coordination calls within North Carolina State Public Health, because we had mold issues. We had many more issues than just drinking water wells and septic systems. A lot of communication between various branches and departments, a lot of work with skilled nursing homes, assisted living facilities, mental health homes. So it wasn't just your private residents that we were heavily involved with. We provided guidance on mold, as I mentioned, restoring water and Legionella risk, cleaning and disinfecting your homes to prevent mold concerns, and then well and septic repairs. And I've already mentioned kind of the reopening of food establishments. This was at the time when, it's a very touristy time, September, October in the mountains. So when you start shutting down entire towns, it hurt them tremendously. What we do is through our emergency response, environmental health specialists from counties will volunteer their time. So we make sure they're authorized in either program they're going to work in, whether it's food, on-site, wells. We're actually still sending people out there to assist, but at the time I put this together, we had sent 104 environmental health specialists. They go out there Monday through Friday. They would man the direct-to-consumer sites. They would go out and help collect water samples. They'd go help issue septic permits. And you can kind of see the numbers. A lot were for restaurant inspections, healthcare assessments, and then the septic and well side of things. So next steps, kind of mentioned this earlier, Hurricane Helene's impact underscores the need for a comprehensive disaster preparedness and resilient infrastructure. I'm hoping that the municipalities have realized we need a backup plan. We can't rely on the state to come in and, when a whole neighborhood loses sewer and they're asking us what's their option, me telling them putting a septic tank in every front yard and putting them on pump and haul until you restore sewer service is not a viable option. So hopefully they're a little better prepared for something such as this. And then a collaborative efforts among government agencies, communities, and really, we talked about it earlier, money. We need money, and people don't want low interest loans. They want grants. They want something to take care of this problem quickly. So some of the lessons learned, pre-flooded wellhead protection is crucial. You saw in the pictures, many of these weren't properly sealed. They had no vent there, which the vent obviously will allow some water in, but when you've just got a void there, there's a lot of flood water that makes their way in there. Rapid post-flood sampling and testing. I mentioned how long it took the state to provide disinfection materials. I had counties go out and purchase it on their own. So, I mean, they beat us to the punch there, but hopefully we can plan ahead before hurricane season, because it does happen. And I still blame Northeastern University for this, because they want a hurricane, because we want the research. And Kelsey said last year, maybe we'll get one this year. She'd been asking for years, and we got one. So we may not let them back in North Carolina again. And then access to emergency disinfection supplies. As I mentioned, it took quite a bit of time to get the materials and get the proper materials, because we were sending stuff back. We even provided disinfection strips so they could see if it was free of residual chlorine. So we provided them everything they needed. It just took time to get all those materials. Flexibility and permitting for well repairs. We looked at allowing guys that aren't certified drillers in North Carolina but work for a certified driller. We almost passed a law to allow them to do well contractor work, because in our state, if you're not certified, you have to work under direct supervision of a certified well contractor. So we pursued other avenues to try to quickly get people up to speed, but it was kind of a knee-jerk reaction, I'll be honest. Even the legislature wanted us doing something from day one, but we're still not to the point that we're out really working like they were before. They're just getting to that point. It was search and recovery for the first few weeks, months. They weren't equipped to really be out handling these issues. Public education on long-term well maintenance, preparing people for both septic and well, what they can do pre and post flood, and we have a lot of materials for that. And I've already mentioned data tracking and GIS mapping of impacted sites. We don't have good data. And so when legislators are coming to us, how many wells were affected? How many septic? We have no clue. So kind of to introduce what Kyla's going to talk about, we reached out to Northeastern because we've been doing grant work with their NASA satellite data. And we reached out to Kyla's group, Ed, and asked, can y'all provide us with any data? So these numbers are a little elevated, but it gave us something to work off of. So they were able to use NASA satellite data. They were able to look at areas that are on municipal sewer water, eliminate those properties, and give us some sort of number. And that number was what? I think 20,000 was the original estimation. I think it's probably closer to 10,000 properties that were heavily affected. But we tell the General Assembly that, and they go down and say it was 30,000. So you can see how the numbers get skewed, but this gave us ideas of how many well users and wells were in each county that was affected. Then we went back to them and said, can you show us how many daycares were potentially affected? How many elementary schools, gas stations? So this was incredible data. And if we can really, 5 minutes, if we can fine tune this and get it to where it's a little more accurate and we can convince counties, and this was a learning curve for them. They went out at every site they went to and they took lat longs of the wells they worked on. So we're starting to get that data, but if you go to Western North Carolina, every county is different. Buncombe County has a ton of money, and they can do a lot more than your smaller counties that may only have one environmental health staff there. So, any questions? I think we have 4 minutes. Thank you. Just read through those. Doesn't matter which one. Okay, so would you please elaborate on how to communicate after Helene? So really, we tried through voicemail, phone calls. I'll be honest, radio was a great option because people still had radios. I mean, there were a lot of people without power and there was a lot of lack of cell service. So it was really us getting the message to the health departments, and then the health departments, because their boots on the ground, could provide that message to the residents. So they were kind of our go-between for this entire process. It was difficult. And I mean, there were counties we didn't hear from for the first week or two because their office was essentially flooded. So it took a while to get that message, and that's something we're trying to kind of figure out a better way, but radio seemed to be the best option initially. Have federal changes affected available funding? Not so much for this group so far. Luckily, we haven't been heavily affected. I know the General Assembly is trying to provide more funding. A lot of that is not related to wells. And many times the funding we do get goes to the Department of Environmental Quality, and their push is centralized wastewater and municipal water. So they're not really backing us when it comes to, in the mountains, you're not going to get city sewer and water these areas. These places are scattered about. It's not financially feasible. How long until everything is back up to code? I would say years. So safe for you to stay at an Airbnb? Guess it depends on where it is. There were a lot of people trapped in Airbnbs because they did not leave. And those are the ones that are probably going to take the longest to figure out because we didn't get calls from some of those owners. They don't live here. It's just a rental home for them. So we'll probably find out when you go stay in those Airbnbs and the system starts failing or the well is not working properly. And Airbnbs are tough for us because many of those allow significantly more numbers of people to stay than what the systems are sized for. So that's a major concern for us. What is the average cost of a well? In Western North Carolina, if they're 700-800 feet, you might spend $25,000 to $30,000. Now I have wells at coastal North Carolina that are 18 feet deep and they're 2-inch diameter. So you can get those for less than $1,000. So it depends on what part of the state you're in, but most of them out that way are going to average anywhere from $6,000 to $15,000 in most cases. Does North Carolina allow air vents? Yes. So we have on any 6-inch drill well, it's required to have a screen vent. Problem is we didn't start enforcing that until 2008. So all your new wells usually have everything that's required in our regulations. The ones that predate 2008, it was in the regulations, but nobody was checking them. So whether or not the driller put them on there, many of them, you'll see them broken off. You'll see them homeowners removed as sitting on the ground. So yes, it is required in North Carolina. And no, we did not at this point provide anything other than bacteria sampling.
All right.
All right, thank you.